Welcome in, everyone. It's good to see you, although I can't see you. Just to let you know, the presentation is being recorded so that we can share the recording afterwards with you. I'm just going to wait until the number slows down a little bit and we know we have everyone in here. Again, welcome everyone. So throughout, feel free to use the chat feature and the Q&A feature as well. We will get to Q&A at the end, most likely. Since the number is still growing. I'll wait just a moment. You will be able to get a copy of the slides, Cynthia. Thank you for asking the question. We will send the slides and the recording. The recording will be on Healthy UC Davis YouTube channel, and we'll send that out as soon as we get it. All right, let's see. It looks like we're starting to level off. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today to talk about gut health. And we're really lucky today to have Allie coming in. She has worked with Dr. Slupsky on the UC Davis campus. I am Linda Adams. I am a dietitian with Staff and Faculty Health and Wellbeing program. And this is some of the things that we do in our nutrition expertise area is bring webinars to campus with the newest information on some of the things that are going on in current issues in nutrition. So very happy to see you today. So like I said, you can use the Q&A. You can also use the chat. It is recorded and we will send it out as soon as we have it. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Allie. Allie just is graduating from UC Davis with a clinical nutrition degree. And so she's on to bigger and better things outside of the UC Davis, but she's here with us today to share information on gut health. Dr. Slupsky is not here today. She had to be called out of town, but Allie has the amazing information for us. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Allie. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much, Linda. I apologize, there's actually a street sweeper that's coming by right now. But I'm super excited to be here. And yes, as Linda said, I actually finished classes at UC Davis last quarter, and I'm actually graduating at the end of spring quarter this quarter. So I'm super excited to take that next step. I start grad school in August. So this is actually one of my favorite topics within nutrition. There were a lot of really interesting topics in nutrition that I loved, but this is probably one of my favorites. So I'm super excited to talk about what I learned over the last couple of years, as well as I learned a lot of new things in making this presentation. So let's go ahead and get started. So just to kind of introduce the gut microbiome, so we're going to discuss in this presentation the essential roles of the gut microbiome, as well as the importance of having a diverse, balanced microbiota to achieve optimal health. We're also going to talk about the overall and long-term health effects that are brought on by our microbiome, as well as how we can help to influence or even improve our gut biome health, with dietary and lifestyle choices. So first off, what even is the gut microbiome? So the microbiome includes all bacteria, viruses, fungi, archaea, and eukaryotes that inhabit our bodies. So yeah, just kind of thinking all the way back to like Bio 101 when you learned about all these kind of ancient species of microbes. So kind of an important note is that it's not just bacteria that's in our gut or in our bodies. It's going to be all of these different microbes together. And we have different sites as well. So it's not just within our gut. So we also have microbes on our skin, in our mouths, and then also in the vaginal areas. Just kind of a fun, interesting note is that at the moment of birth, the microbiome of the mother is actually passed on to the infant. And then whatever that infant feeds on, so whether it's formula or breast milk, is going to be what sort of primes and continues on the growth of the microbiome of the infant. So we have a lot of this information about the microbiome given from the National Institute of Health. So they worked on this human microbiome project from 2007 to 2016, and their overall goal was to kind of characterize the human microbiome, and then as well as analyze the role that the microbiome has for our health as well as diseases. And so what they were able to find was that there are over 3,000 reference bacterial genomes, and that the human gut contains 10 times the number of cells than in our entire bodies. So that's over 100 trillion microbes. They also characterize 15 to 36,000 different species of bacteria. And their overall conclusions were that we are essentially these walking ecosystems. And we have these microbial communities that really play a huge role in digestion and our immune health, as well as our own mental health. And we can also help to shape these microbes through diet, lifestyle, and environment. And all of their resources are actually open source, which means that you can access anything that they were able to come across. All of their research that they found can be found at this website here, HMP, which is just the Human Microbiome Project, dacc.org. So I highly recommend, if you're interested in this kind of stuff at all, to check that out and see kind of what they came across over those 9 years. Hope that math is right. All right, so getting specific into our GI tract. So we and these microbes share this sort of commensal relationship. And essentially what that means is that these microbes benefit from us in that we give them shelter and we give them food, and we give them in an environment where they can live and thrive. But we don't really reap much benefit. But this is seen in research articles like all over, and that they share this commensal relationship. However, we're actually discovering that there's a different sort of relationship that we share, and that we get benefits from them, and that it's more of a symbiotic relationship. But this is a lot more complex because when we don't provide the correct environment for them, or we're extremely stressed, we can actually put stress on the microbes in our gut, and this can turn into sort of a toxic relationship, and where they can produce, there can be some negative repercussions that we can get from them. And so, all in all, our GI, or all over, our microbes in our entire body contain about 3 to 4 pounds of dry weight, which is incredible. You think of a 5 pound weight at the gym, and just subtract a pound or so from that, and that's all of the microbes in your body. So it's really an incredible complex system. So while they do a lot of things, they help to primarily in the GI tract to break down proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates. Sort of an important emphasis on the carbohydrates. And then fun fact, so having pets in the household can actually help to influence your microbiota. So they found that when they analyzed the microbiota of pets in the house and their pet owners, that there actually are a lot of similarities, just kind of showing the kind of distinction between, or not distinction, but just showing that there is a strong relationship between microbiome and the environment. Okay, so what can affect my microbiome? So environment, obviously, and we'll get into a little bit of that more later as well. Genetics, medication, and then sort of the bulk of this presentation, which is going to be diet. So just from here on out, we're going to start talking about digestion, the role of microbes and fermentation, the difference between good versus opportunistic bacteria. We're going to talk about SCFA, which is short chain fatty acids, kind of a mouthful, and then their role in the benefits that we can reap from these microbes, as well as metabolism. And then dysbiosis, which is just when things start to go wrong. And then we're also going to talk about gut support, the difference between prebiotics, probiotics, examples of each, and then also lifestyle factors that can help to support our overall gut health. Okay, so diving into digestion. So this is just sort of like a snapshot of our GI tract. So in like the most simplest form, we've got our stomach, we've got our small intestine, and then we also have our large intestine. So I was hoping the cursor was going to work. That's fine. So at each sort of location within the gut, we actually have these different species that are able to colonize. And they're able to do so because of specific environmental factors. So you kind of imagine when you're breathing in oxygen, then oxygen is going into the stomach. We have more, that oxygen that's present. And then the stomach also has a lot of acid to help break down food. So the microbes that live in the stomach primarily are going to be ones that can breathe oxygen and also handle a highly acidic environment. And then as you move further down the GI tract and you get into the large intestine, which another word for that is colon. So as you get into the colon, you've got these bacteria that can't handle quite as high of a, or sorry, can't handle as much of an acidic environment. And then they also, there's a lack of oxygen present. And so, actually, the most abundant source of these microbes within the GI tract are going to be found in the colon. So, you can find about 100 billion to a trillion of these microbes. And this is actually where the bulk of the work is going to be done and where a lot of the activity happens that we're going to discuss throughout the presentation. And then an important note here too is that we actually don't possess the enzymes that break down fiber. And so this fiber becomes a source of food for bacteria in the colon. And another way of saying this is essentially that this food is like a fermentable substrate for these bacteria in the gut. So fermentation is going to be the breakdown of these carbohydrates in this lack of oxygen environment in the colon, and they were able to produce energy as a result of this. So this energy is going to come in the form of these short chain fatty acids, and I'll definitely go more into detail about what these are and the benefits of these. But an important note here also is that it is very important to have this fermentable substrate. So it's important to have this food for the gut bacteria, and we'll discuss why that is as well. Okay, so first off, what is good bacteria? Like, what is the difference between good, bad bacteria? So good bacteria are going to be known as these saccharolytic bacteria, which are, it's just a big fancy word for they break down fiber. And so bifidobacteria, which is pictured on the right-hand side here, bifidobacteria, interestingly enough, is going to be the bacteria that is largely present in the gut of infants if they're exclusively breastfed, because the human milk provides a lot of the sugars or oligosaccharides that these microbes can break down. So you're going to have a higher volume of these bifidobacteria within the infant gut. And these saccharolytic bacteria produce a lot of beneficial compounds. So those short chain fatty acids I mentioned are going to be one huge one. And they also they support the metabolism of vitamin K too. So a lot of vitamin K is going to be produced in the colon. So yes, you can get vitamin K from different food sources, but a large amount of that vitamin K is actually going to come from these bacteria that reside in the colon. And they also can help improve cognitive function. So if you've ever heard of this gut-brain axis, this is definitely one of the limbs of that. So the microbes within the gut are actually responsible for producing over 95% of our body's serotonin. Serotonin is just a neurotransmitter, or this chemical that helps with brain function and with mood. And then just sort of a little preview as to what we're going to get into with these short chain fatty acids. So their benefits include reducing systemic inflammation, suppressing pathogens and toxins, as well as help to maintain our overall gut health and integrity. Okay, so onto these opportunistic bacteria. So these bacteria don't really cause any trouble when we're healthy and everything's functioning properly. So these are primarily going to consist of bacteria that break down protein and fat, so these proteolytic and lipolytic bacteria. And these are going to include a number of different bacteria, including E. coli. So I only mention this because there's a bunch of different strains of E. coli. So there's toxic and non-toxic. So the E. coli that naturally reside in our gut and typically don't cause many problems are going to be the non-toxic strain. So it's not the same strain that was, in the lake during the Olympics when they had the E. coli outbreak. And when we have a higher number of these more opportunistic bacteria, it's going to be associated with a higher amount of fat and protein that's going to be consumed in the diet. And while these are fine in small number, having an excess of these opportunistic bacteria in relation to the good bacteria are going to cause an excess of byproducts. And so these byproducts are different than the short chain fatty acids that are produced by the good bacteria. And these can include byproducts such as ammonia. And so when you have high amounts of some of these, they can cause different adverse health effects. And ammonia specifically can cause a number of issues, but it can also cause negative neurocognitive effects. And these also compete with the saccharolytic bacteria as well for resources and for housing. So when you have a higher number of these opportunistic in relation to the good, you're going to result in something called dysbiosis. We'll also get into that a little bit more later. Okay, so I've been talking a lot about these short chain fatty acids. What are they? So we'll get into that. So when you have these dietary fibers that enter into the colon, they're going to be able to be broken down or digested by these gut microbes, these beneficial microbiota, and then through that process of fermentation, as they get digested, they're going to produce these short chain fatty acids. And so you have a number of different fermentable substrates. So fiber is sort of this like overarching umbrella term. So there's different types of fibers, different starches, different types of complex sugars that sort of can be termed fiber in general. But all of these provide substrate for these microbiota. And what these short chain fatty acids can do is they can help to aid in mineral absorption. So they can aid in calcium, phosphate, and magnesium absorption. They can also convert the energy that's stored within our tissues into energy that's able to be utilized, which is extremely important because it's important for metabolic activity. So having constant metabolic activity is going to be really great for just overall tissue and metabolism processes. So this is particularly seen in fat tissue as well as colon cells. So all of these cells that line the colon are going to be cells that need energy and are metabolically active. So these short chain fatty acids can help to keep these in function. And also the production of these short chain fatty acids can help to lower the pH of the colon, which promotes an environment where good bacteria can thrive. So it's sort of this positive feedback loop. So the more short chain fatty acids that are produced, the more good bacteria that are able to thrive, and then the more short chain fatty acids that are able to be produced. All right, and then some other really important factors that these provide is these acids can have anti-inflammatory effects. So interestingly, with obesity, when complications can arise, you actually can get this sort of inflammation with adipose tissue or fat tissue, and this can cause a number of complications. And so these short chain fatty acids can actually help to sort of eradicate these complications, as well as just reducing the inflammation. They can help stimulate the production of the protective gut lining. So our guts are not just tissue. They're also going to have this like mucus layer that protects them from various toxins that are in the food. And so this is something that's extremely important. So we want to make sure that we keep this healthy. They can help regulate appetite. These acids can also maintain blood sugar and improve insulin sensitivity. So insulin sensitivity is just kind of a fancy way of saying it allows this hormone called insulin to allow glucose into different tissues. And that's important because all of these tissues run on a fuel that is glucose. And so allowing this to enter into these tissues can make sure that they're metabolically active. So like muscle, muscle, liver, and then fat tissues, these all rely on glucose in order to be able to function properly. And then regarding insulin sensitivity, so there are a couple of hormones that I did want to just kind of point out. So as you increase the sensitivity, so as insulin is able to function properly, you have the increased secretion of what's called PYY. And so this can help to delay gastric emptying or the emptying of the stomach, which can help slow glucose absorption and then allows for more stable insulin release. And just kind of overall, this just helps you feel fuller longer. And then another one, it helps to stimulate production of GLP-1. And so this stimulates insulin secretion when there's glucose present in the blood. So this is more relevant for those if you've ever had type 2 diabetes or know anyone with type 2 diabetes. because this can help to regulate the production of insulin release. And so that's a hallmark of type 2 diabetes is, the insulin release is not acting or functioning as it should. And so this can definitely help. And so the GLP-1 agonist is a drug that you can take to help stimulate this. And then by promoting GLP-1, you can also promote satiety by reducing appetite. Okay, so what happens when things are not working properly? What happens when things just go wrong? So you result in something called dysbiosis. And dysbiosis is just a disruption due to the offset of these good bacteria in comparison to these opportunistic bacteria. So you typically would have a higher ratio of these opportunistic, and this can cause a number of health effects. So recall it's important to have fermentable substrate. So again, it's important to have food for these bacteria because if they don't have food to eat based on whatever you're eating just in your diet, so there's no food in the colon, they'll actually start to eat you, essentially. So they'll start to eat your own gut lining. They'll break away at this mucus layer, and then that can wreak a lot of havoc. So what can result from dysbiosis? So you can get poor digestion. So this is sort of so my cursor's not working, but on the top part of the little finger-like projections is going to be where the food would enter into or I guess just come in contact with these finger-like projections. And so you've got these little triangles here that would represent enzymes. So this is an example of a lactase enzyme, something that helps to break down lactose. So if you've ever had lactose intolerance, you understand that it's extremely uncomfortable. It's painful. And this is one of those things that can happen, especially if you're not lactose intolerant, and you start to experience dysbiosis. You understand what it feels to be lactose intolerant because you don't have these, as these finger-like projections are getting eaten away by these bacteria, so are the enzymes. So you're not able to digest something like lactose, for example. And then as it eats away at this layer, it can also eat away at the IgA, which are antibodies. So imagine, our gut is sort of like the first line of defense for pathogens that we come into contact via, whether we breathe something in or anything that we eat. So if we eat toxins or pathogens, our guts are going to be sort of this line of defense so that they can't make it into the bloodstream. And so if you've got this dysbiosis that's taking away these antibodies, then you're sort of removing that defense mechanism. And so pathogens are more easily able to enter into the bloodstream and you can get sick. And dysbiosis can also increase just overall systemic inflammation and kind of as we talked about with obesity, inflammation with these fat cells. It can result in insulin resistance, decreased neurotransmitter production, so that serotonin may not be produced, which could definitely affect your mood. And it can also result in something called leaky gut, which is, I don't think that's a clinical term, but it explains what's going on pretty well. So this is that mucus layer that I was mentioning. So this is kind of what's going to like sit on top of those finger-like projections on your cells in the gut. And so as food and pathogens come into contact with that mucus layer, they're able to defend against these invaders. But as that mucus layer kind of gets eaten away, these projections, these little fingers start to get eaten away, and then it starts to deteriorate the cells altogether, which allow these pathogens to enter in and then get into the bloodstream, and you're more likely to get sick, and inflammation can occur. So what can cause dysbiosis? So a number of things. So antibiotics are a really big proponent in dysbiosis. So antibiotics are great for killing off the pathogenic bacteria that might be in your gut, but unfortunately they can also kill off a lot of the good bacteria. They're not so much targeted towards a specific species of bacteria. And so this can cause not only the reduction in beneficial bacteria, but it can also just cause an overall reduction. So remember, they all have the important roles, even the opportunistic bacteria, and that they help to break down different substrates, which is important for us so that we can not only just get the nutrition from the food, but also so that we can maintain a lot of these positive benefits that we get from the bacteria. And also taking NSAIDs, so like ibuprofen, aspirin, or Aleve. When we take these regularly, then we can also cause inflammation of our gut, which can result in dysbiosis. Having a low fiber diet, which is really similar to having a diet that's high in fat or high in sugar, because it's kind of implied that when we have a diet that's high in fat or sugar, that we're not eating enough fiber. So it's sort of replacing that fiber. So ensuring that we get enough of this fermentable substrate into our gut. Stress can definitely cause dysbiosis, infection, as well as different lifestyle factors, including a sedentary lifestyle. Okay, so now that I talked about all that, what are some different ways that we can help to influence this production of short chain fatty acids? And another word for these types of foods is going to be prebiotics. So, prebiotics is going to be food for the microbes, essentially. So, we're not really feeding us so much. But so these are going to include different fruits, vegetables, whole grains. So these down here are Jerusalem artichokes. I've never seen them before, but apparently they're pretty high in prebiotic fibers. Seaweed, beans. So these are all going to be great sources. This isn't an exhaustive list, but it's just a pretty good example of what we can eat. And it's also important that we introduce these prebiotic foods pretty slowly if we're currently on a low fiber diet. And just a spoiler alert, the majority of Americans actually are on a low fiber diet unintentionally. So we want to be sure to incorporate a lot of these different prebiotic foods into our diets. So, if you go from your regular diet, which may be low fiber, and you start to increase maybe like one or two of these prebiotic foods, for every meal, and you'll start to notice maybe like some pain or discomfort or bloating. It's because what's happening is you're feeding the not only the good bacteria, which is kind of the goal. We want to feed these good bacteria so we get these short chain fatty acids, but you're also feeding these opportunistic bacteria. So you're kind of getting a lot of these these unwanted end products in the beginning. And so, but the good thing is that the more that these beneficial bacteria get this prebiotic, this food source, the more short chain fatty acids they produce, the more they actually outcompete these opportunistic bacteria. So that would be a very short term, the bloating and the gas would all be a very short term thing. So if you continue on with prebiotic food increasing in your diet, then you would eventually, those symptoms would subside. But just kind of to disclaimer. So yeah, the more fiber that you eat, the more good bacteria are able to be produced, the more short chain fatty acids, or they're not produced, sorry, the more good bacteria will be present, more short chain fatty acids will be produced, fewer opportunistic bacteria, and then more room for these good bacteria to grow. Okay, so that was prebiotics. So let's get into probiotics. So probiotics are these live organisms that, when administered in adequate amounts, can offer a health benefit to the host. So this is a formal definition that the International Scientific Association, probiotics and prebiotics, supplied. And an example of probiotic foods are going to be foods that are fermented, and also supplements can be added in. So probiotics can help to rebalance the gut after antibiotics, is an example. And they also can compete with these pathogenic microbes. You can also combine prebiotics with probiotics, and this is known as a symbiotic. So yogurt, which would be your pro, and then your banana, which would be your pre. Kimchi with cooked lentils, miso, and seaweed. And together, these just kind of create like this powerhouse synergistic effect for your gut health. Okay, so some sources of probiotic foods. So we have kefir, which is kind of this top left corner here. You can actually buy this at Safeway. You can also buy it at Trader Joe's, but it's just got the Trader Joe's brand name. This is actually something that I really like to drink. So you can have like a serving of this. I think it's just a cup of it, in the morning, and it can really benefit your gut microbiome. And then yogurt, which contains live active cultures. So yogurt is fermented milk. So in the process of producing the yogurt, you are going to get these bacteria that are fermenting But with commercial yogurt making, you're typically not going to have these bacteria once the process is completed. So a lot of the bacteria will die off in the process. So you want to look for yogurt that says specifically on the label that contains live active cultures, because they'll kind of add these bacteria in back in at the end of the process, so that you can ensure that these are actually in the product. Tempeh, which is just going to be fermented soy products, kombucha tea, kimchi, miso, sauerkraut. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. This is just a good example of some probiotic foods. And then kind of watch out for commercially fermented foods, because a lot of these fermented foods that are made in these large factories can have they're pasteurized, which means that the bacteria are heat killed. So a lot of the bacteria are not even going to be present really in the end product, which is kind of, we really want this. It's kind of the point of eating these probiotic foods. Um, and they're also delicious. So you want to look for products that would say like naturally fermented. So in the kind of bottom right corner, you've got this naturally fermented kimchi. This is actually a brand that's found at Costco, and I actually have it in my fridge. It's really good. I wouldn't say I'm a connoisseur of kimchi, so this is probably maybe the fourth or fifth kimchi I've had in my entire life, but I really like it. It's on the sweeter side, which is probably why I like it. And then so I Funny enough, I put this in the presentation, the difference between pickled and fermented, mainly because I actually didn't really know the difference before doing this presentation. But so when you pickle foods, you're actually pickling by soaking these different fruits or different vegetables in a vinegar solution. So it's, this acetic acid is going to kill off a lot of the bacteria. Whereas with fermenting, you're kind of soaking them in this brine. So it's just like a water salt solution that, this cabbage and different vegetables are soaking in. And this actually facilitates the growth of these good bacteria. So you're going to end up with a lot more beneficial bacteria in the end product. And also, polyphenol-rich foods are going to be high in probiotics. They're also going to be extremely high in antioxidants as well. So polyphenol-rich foods include raspberries, different teas, wine in moderation, extra virgin olive oil, and pomegranates. Okay, so probiotic supplements. So supplements, unfortunately, they are more of a transient. They have more of a transient effect. So when we take the supplement, the probiotics are really only going to be present in the gut for the duration of the digestive process. So like the 6 to 8 hours that they're going to be digesting. They're really only going to be in our gut for about that long. So they don't colonize within the gut. So if you do take probiotic supplements for, a specific health issue, or you just want to continually maintain your gut health, then you would have to take these every day. You can also just take them on sort of more like an as needed basis. But when looking for probiotic supplements, you want to look for ones that have specific strains, high CFU counts, and then storage instructions. So to kind of back up and explain a little bit. So there are specific strains of bacteria that can contribute to different health effects or different health benefits. So if you kind of recall from that slide with the picture of the GI tract, so you have different bacteria that can colonize in different areas depending on their environment. So whether it's, it's acidic or lack of oxygen or what have you. So there's different strains that are present. So depending on the type of GI issue that you want to specifically target, you would want to pick a strain or a group of strains that would really benefit that. And I actually have this like fact sheet kind of down here at the bottom. The National Institute of Health provided this probiotics fact sheet that kind of gives examples of uses of probiotics. So for example, there's like irritable bowel disease, diarrhea, a number of different things that you would maybe use a probiotic for. And then it would also give you information on what type of, bacteria maybe would be present or influence this type of whatever the health issue might be. So that's a really good website to check out. And then also the CFU is just going to be the number of bacteria or microbes that are present in each serving. So you want to look for one that's in the billions. So these are just examples here on the right hand side. So if you look at the now, so it says 10 to 25 billion. So that would be the CFU count for that. And then the one on the right says 50 billion. And then you also want to see how it's stored. So I noted here at refrigeration. So when these microbes get too high in temperature, they can actually be killed off, which would greatly reduce the efficacy of the probiotic. And not only that, but also moisture. So if moisture can get into it's typically going to be like in a pill form. So if moisture maybe gets into the pills, then it would prematurely activate these microbes. And so you wouldn't reap the effects that you wouldn't reach its full potential of the microbiota within the probiotic. Okay, so how do we help to support a healthy gut? So just kind of putting all this together and just applying it. So having a high fiber diet is extremely important. Having a plant-rich diet is also extremely important. So if you kind of noticed, a lot of the prebiotics and probiotics are going to be plant sources, with the exception of the kefir and the yogurt. Those are going to be animal sources, but the majority of these are going to be from plants. Fermented foods and then these polyphenol-rich foods are going to be really important for a healthy gut microbiome. And then also avoiding medications like NSAIDs or antibiotics when possible. So for the example of NSAIDs, if you get like chronic headaches might be a different situation, but maybe if you get, like infrequent headaches, maybe trying to figure out like, oh, okay, am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Am I looking at screens too much? It's definitely an issue with me. So all these can potentially cause headaches. So maybe trying to like self-monitor, self-regulate to see if there's something that you can do to alleviate your headache rather than initially just jumping for the medication. And then antibiotics could be a discussion that you could have with your doctor. So, if your doctor says that you need to be on antibiotics for X reasons, X, Y, Z, maybe having that discussion like, okay, is this absolutely necessary? Is there any other course of action we can take or any other route we can go? And if there is, then great. If not, then I would definitely listen to your doctor and take them. I would not advise to, if you're prescribed them, just not take them, because there could be a very legitimate reason why you probably should be taking them. So yeah, just opening that line of discussion with your doctor. And then also having physical activity is a great way to help support a healthy gut microbiome. So physical activity helps increase metabolic activity, which is overall beneficial for our gut, and it could also be a way to reduce stress. And then also getting quality sleep. So interestingly, your gut microbiome actually follow a circadian rhythm, a lot like we do. So they can actually help to modulate quality, the timing, and the hormone releases during sleep. So it's very interesting. So yeah, getting quality sleep is something that could definitely impact your microbiome as well. And then also managing stress levels. So they've recently found in research that cortisol, which is going to be the stress hormone that's released, so there's a relationship between cortisol release and gut health, or these gut microbes. And so when we're under a lot of stress, there could be this negative feedback loop, that these gut microbes are, kind of facilitating this release in cortisol as well. So helping to manage stress would definitely help to control your gut microbiome health. And then getting outside also. So this hygiene hypothesis is going to be, so there was a study that was done where they had mice, and they had a set of germ-free mice that were in this overly sanitized environment, not really exposed to a lot of environmental factors. And then they had a group of mice that were exposed more to like a normal life, and had, exposure to all types of different environmental factors. And they examined the gut microbiome of each, and they actually found that the ones that were in more of like the realistic setting were gonna be, they had a higher diverse microbiome than the ones that were in this overly sanitized environment. So it's important. It's kind of like when you think about children so early in life, they're increasing their immune system. Their adaptive immunity is growing as they get exposure to these different pathogens, as well as these beneficial microbes. So it's not only increasing the diversity and the number of beneficial microbes in their microbiome, but they're also just getting this exposure. And if you've ever had kids or been around kids, they get sick a lot. And this is why, because they're priming their immune system to mature and recognize these pathogens later in life. So similarly, this can happen for us as well as adults. When we get outside, we get exposure to these different microbes outside. And we can also, introduce these more pathogenic ones and let our immune system know, like, hey, like this one's not good, stay away, as well as increase the diversity for our own gut health. And I think that is it for me. So thank you so much. And
Thank you
if
for
we,
that. Very interesting information, Allie. So interesting. I don't know if you can see the chat and the Q&A, but I'm going to share some of the questions with you.
yeah, let
Uh,
me
if
unshare
you
my
stop,
screen.
yeah, and share, and then you can see the Q&A.
I don't know. I
So
don't know if I,
starting at the top of the Q&A, can you speak a bit more about the microbiomes passed to babies during birth? Are there some examples of potential outcomes for the child due to the mother's microbiome at that time? I don't know how much you know about that, but it's a question that was asked.
yeah, that's a really, really good question. And to be honest, I don't know if I can fully answer the question. Kia, I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head about like the diversity of the mother's microbiome and how it would affect the infant. Um, I would assume that if the baby was not eating or if it was having gastrointestinal health issues, this would probably be an indicator of maybe there is just not enough of this priming, and so there might be something that they could do. Maybe they could provide microbes to the baby, but yeah, I'm not entirely
Be
sure.
interesting to forward this to Dr. Slepsky and see what she has to say if
Yeah,
you
I
have
can
the
definitely do
opportunity,
that.
Ellie.
And yeah, any of these questions I can definitely relay to her, but that is a good
The
one. Yes,
next,
I
the
will.
next question, how can you prevent or minimize the risk of having too many of these opportunistic bacteria?
I think just ensuring that you have a good diet. So a diet's high in these prebiotics and these probiotics, and then also, kind of watching your stress levels, ensuring that you get adequate sleep, and just so these microbes are really responsive to the things that we do and that we feel. So if we have a really healthy um, if we have, healthy habits, then this could increase the number of these beneficial bacteria, which would outcompete the opportunistic bacteria. I don't know if that
So
answers.
basically, taking care of the bugs that are there and keeping them healthy will help you
Yes. Yes.
minimize the risk. And I imagine the next question is, how do I produce more short chain fatty acids? Which would it be the same thing, taking
That would
care of
be,
bugs?
yeah. Yeah, that would be a lot of the similar things is that if you um, yeah, these prebiotics would feed the beneficial bacteria, and so kind of naturally what happens is when you do feed these, when you supply like healthy habits, I guess, and then also these prebiotics and these probiotics, then you're automatically going to start to increase the number of the beneficial, which would increase the amount of short chain fatty acids. So it's just important to have kind of that like the beneficial bacteria higher in number, and the higher that you have of those would increase the short chain fatty acids.
Makes sense. Nicole asks, what if I'm needing to follow a low FODMAP diet? The prebiotic list included a lot of high FODMAP foods.
Mm.
Do you have any ideas on that, Allie?
We We did learn about FODMAPs very briefly. I kind of remind me what FODMAPs are.
So those are a special kind of carbohydrate. So that are digested and sometimes cause symptoms in certain people. So people with gastrointestinal symptoms or other symptoms might be asked to limit the amount of foods that they eat that are high in those particular oligosaccharides or carbohydrates to see if it helps. And then if it helps to continue that low intake to, to sustain the relief. So as far as I'm concerned, I think, well, you'd have to make a decision if the FODMAP bothering you is worth feeding the gut, which probably it isn't, and possibly using some of the supplements. I don't know, Allie, what do you think?
That was gonna kind of be my course of action too, is maybe introducing like a probiotic to see if that could help. And then yeah, it would sounds like it's a lot of experimentation and just seeing what foods work, but also can help with gut health. Um, yeah, I would say just experimentation and maybe also talking with like a dietitian or your doctor to kind of help see what works for you.
Does it matter if you take probiotics on an empty stomach or with food?
Hmm. I'm actually not sure. I'll have to get back to
The
you on that one.
the now probiotics apparently say to take them on an empty stomach or between meals. I have had that experience as well with someone who had some really bad GI problems from antibiotics. And it just really killed it off and created a terrible situation to take those an hour before on either side of food. So
Okay.
I would say on an empty stomach. Um, and the next question is a little bit similar. It wanting to know if the probiotics during the antibiotic treatment are really helpful. And some physicians really think that they are. It would
Yes.
definitely be a good thing to ask your physician, though, to make sure that it fits into the treatment plan that you are entering.
Yes. Agreed. Yeah.
Oh, here's an interesting question, Allie. Great presentation. Is it possible to have your gut microbiome analyzed, yielding more targeted advice? You know anything about that?
So yeah, so that's actually, I think, a newer thing. I think
Mhm.
that would be a really interesting thing to know information wise, but I think the more targeted that you get with your diet, the more limited you are, and like the more difficult it could be to ensure that you're following this specific plan. So I would say just you can definitely do that, and I think it would be a lot of fun to learn about your specific microbiome. But I think just kind of following a more generic plan might be something that would be easier to follow, so that you're not searching in the grocery store like, oh, I need these
Um,
specific type of vegetables, like, oh, and they're out, like, what do I do? So just having like an overall education on these different fruits and vegetables and different foods that can bolster this immune system, then I think that, or your microbiome would be a better route.
that makes sense. Another question, do any studies mention specific types of outdoor activities? Is being active while being outside more beneficial than simply being out in nature?
I would say being active any way that you can is going to be a good way to go. But yes, if you can get outside, I would say that that would be an uh, even better because you are exposing yourself to these microbes in the environment while also simultaneously getting physically or physical activity. So yeah, I would say probably yes.
That makes sense. This is a very interesting question someone has about if you have too many opportunistic bacteria, is there a way to reset, especially since the probiotic supplements, they're sort of transient. They only last in the gut as long as they last, as you said in the presentation. Are there any alternatives? And somebody followed up on that question by asking, let me see if I can find it, uh, about the fecal transplants for
Hmm.
altering
I'm
gut
so excited someone
microbiome.
brought that up. Yeah, so fecal transplants I think are more of like a last resort. Like if you experienced a severe GI disorder, where you are just not able to digest food, you're not getting nutrients, there's just something significantly wrong. And having a sort of like microbiome, as you put it, reset, that would be a way to do it, would be this fecal transplant. But it's not super common to be in that position to receive that. So in terms of reset, we kind of have the microbiome that we have, though we can increase the diversity of it. It's kind of hard to like wipe out and start with a clean slate. And so just sort of reducing the number of opportunistic bacteria again is just going to kind of come with the prebiotics and probiotics and lifestyle choices that we make to increase the number of beneficial that will ultimately reduce the number of these opportunistic.
That makes sense. A final question here. So there's a relationship between the gut microbiome and mental health. Is there any, and you talked about the serotonin and that kind of thing. Is there any relationship between your gut microbiome and cancer? I would think so, but I don't know. Do you have any other information on that?
Um, I don't. I have not learned anything about that. It's a really interesting question. I'd love to look into that though to see. I do also enjoy learning about nutrition
Mm-hmm,
when with cancer, so I would
mm-hmm,
I would actually love to look that up and get
mm-hmm.
back to you on that.
That sounds good. I'm transitioning over to the chat because we have some different questions over there and we have a few more minutes. Um, Milk yogurt versus non-milk yogurt. Is one better than the other?
You know, I'm actually not sure the process of making yogurt with non-dairy products. I would assume there's also a fermentation process in that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say maybe look at the yogurt and see if it says, contains these live active cultures. But I will look into that because I'm actually, yeah, I'm not entirely sure with these non-dairies.
Can cooking prebiotic and probiotic foods help or hinder the effectiveness to feed the good bacteria?
So with prebiotic foods, you're likely not going to affect the food source for the bacteria, but with probiotics,
Mm-hmm.
yes, because probiotics are going to contain these live bacteria. So yes, if you heat them, you are likely going to kill
Mm-hmm.
them if you heat them to a certain degree.
So, how did they make it through the stomach? Is it strain dependent?
So it may not be perfect. It may not hit like your colon and then just all of a sudden release. It may release incrementally. So as it makes its way through the digestive tract, which might be one reason why they want such a high number of CFU, so that,
Mm-hmm.
as they are getting killed off or like as they're kind of making their way through the
Mm-hmm.
digestive tract, they're able to kind of target multiple areas.
Mm-hmm.
That is a good question, actually.
It makes a lot of sense, though, what you said.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, this is very interesting. What amount of time can you intermittently fast without destroying the lining of the intestines?
Hmm.
I have no idea.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm gonna look into that one as well.
I wonder if Dr. Slepsky has an opinion on that or has done any sort of research. We
Yeah,
can find out and pass it all along.
yeah.
Um, Let's see what other question. When eating fermented foods such as kimchi, I would assume cooking it would remove the probiotic, which we just talked about. It would kill the bacteria. Do you have any good book recommendations, Allie? There are a couple of folks that recommended books in the chat. So for those
Cool.
who asked, but do you have any favorite books on the subject?
I myself read The Mind Gut Connection, which
Hmm.
I thought was pretty interesting. And then other than that, in terms of just like book, not
Hmm.
really. I
Hmm.
mean, other than textbooks.
Hmm.
So yeah, I'd love to get into that more though and read more books on it. Yeah, so I'll actually look at the chat for those books too.
What are the pros and cons in our last few minutes? And you may not know this of polyethylene glycol 3350 powder for solution osmotic laxative. Is it okay to use on an ongoing basis? Will combining it with psyllium fiber powder or combining it with the psyllium fiber powder to address chronic constipation?
That would be something maybe more to ask your doctor. I unfortunately am not sure about that one. Yeah,
Yeah. And yeah, osmotic diarrhea just really cleans everything out and rinses the intestines out completely. And I don't know how much that affects the microbiome.
I would imagine it would also, yeah, probably clean a little bit out of your microbiome, or at least create a different environment because um, you're not providing the food source, and you're changing the environment to something. Um, yeah, you're just changing the environment. So I would also imagine it would clean out some of the microbiome as well.
And lots of great presentations. Thank you for the information. Can you talk briefly about the role of processed sugar in gut health? So is processed sugar really not good for the good guys?
Yeah, so I would say in general of the research I was coming across was saying to limit your processed foods, not just processed sugars, but processed foods. Because yes, it is, you're not getting like these, I keep saying like these prebiotic foods, but the list is long. So there's a lot of foods that would be considered a prebiotic. So the more you're supplementing, these whole food sources with these more processed foods, then you're limiting the amount of um, resources that these microbes can, thrive on. And so these processed sugars, because they don't contain the composition that is beneficial for the microbes to live off of. It doesn't really benefit them. And so you're essentially just supplementing for something that could benefit them. And then they also have higher numbers of these like higher sugar processed foods can also have other health implications as well, aside from the microbiome.
Thank you so much, Allie. We are almost at time, so I'm just going to close us out with a thank you for coming in and presenting that information. It was very, very interesting. I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
For everyone else that's here, thank you so much for coming. We appreciate you coming in. We will be, like I said in the chat, sending out the slide deck as well as the recording when it's available to us. So you'll get that email directly from me. So I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you again for coming.
Thank you all so much. And someone actually noted in the chat too that there were questions when they registered, and if these questions could be answered.
Oh,
Um, so if that is, I can try to do some of that.
sure. I will get those for you, Allie, and let you put that document together and send out.
Okay, great. Sounds good.